Every year, the world produces a number, measured, reported, repeated. As of 2025, that number is about $123.58 trillion. GDP, gross domestic product, the total value of everything produced across the world in one year. And because that number is so large, it becomes the story we believe. If it rises, we say the world is improving. If it slows, we say something is wrong. But pause, because GDP tells us what came out. It does not tell us what went in. Now shift the lens. Look again. Not in money, in time, human time. Every shift worked. Every commute, every classroom hour, every delivery, every night shift, every fragment of life traded into the system. Now place a second ledger beside the first. GDP, gross domestic product, the output. GDT, gross domestic time, the input. The human hours required to produce that output. And this is where the world begins to change shape. Because that $123.58 trillion did not appear on its own. It was built by a world of roughly 8.2 billion people, with a global labor force of about 3.7 billion human beings. If we translate that into work on a planetary scale, we are talking about roughly 6.6 trillion hours of human labor per year flowing into the world economy. That is the equivalent of roughly 9.5 million complete human lives compressed into a single year of economic activity, if one human life is measured from birth to death across about 80 years. And if you measure it as working lives, it is tens of millions of full working lifetimes spent every single year to keep the machine running. The exact framing can vary, but the scale does not. So the real question is not only how much did the world make, but also how much human life did it spend to make it. Now zoom out. The world is not only divided by borders, it is divided by wealth layers. At the top, high-income economies, where annual income rises above $13,935 per person. Below them, upper-middle-income economies, ranging from $4,496 to $13,935. Then, lower-middle-income economies, between $1,136 and $4,495. And at the base, low-income economies, where income stays at $1,135 or less per year. Now place the world's population into these layers. At the top, about 1.42 billion people. Below them, 2.82 billion. Then, 3.12 billion. And at the base, around 625 million people. And when you lay the ledger over the map, the fracture becomes impossible to ignore. The high-income layer, less than 1/5 of humanity, captures roughly 64% of global output, with only about 16% of the world's work hours. The rest of the world provides most of the hours and receives a much smaller share of the money. And that is the point. The same hour does not return the same life. Same species, same 24 hours, same fatigue, different outcome. Why? Because an hour does not travel straight from labor to reward. It passes through a conversion machine, a system, and that machine has three major chambers: productivity, risk, friction. Productivity is about what surrounds the hour. Tools, training, reliable power, software, transport networks, ports that function, supply chains that do not break every few weeks. Take two people. Give them the same intelligence, the same discipline, the same 8-hour shift, but give one better machines, better logistics, better infrastructure, better systems. The output will not be the same. Risk is about what threatens the hour before it can fully turn into income. Inflation, currency instability, borrowing costs, weak enforcement, political uncertainty, insurance costs, higher financing pressure all across the chain. And friction is about what gets lost between effort and reward. Queues, forms, manual checks, broken roads, port delays, customs uncertainty, outages, compliance time. A lost afternoon here, 3 lost days there. A week waiting for what should have taken an hour. And the critical point is this: the worker still spent the time. The life was still spent, but the system returned less for it. Now bring it down from the world map to two lives. Tamara, Mikhail, both teach, both work full-time, both give their month to the system, but their month does not pass through the same machine. Tamara lives in Chisinau. In 2025, a teacher earns about 13,000 lei per month, around 650 euros. Now place ownership in front of her. A modest apartment in Chisinau costs roughly 100,000 euros. At a mortgage rate of about 7%, that becomes roughly 700 euros per month for 30 years. The mortgage alone already exceeds her income. Before food, before electricity, before transport, before life itself. For Tamara, the system consumes the life before it can be lived. Now look at Mikhail in Lisbon. In 2025, a teacher earns about 2,500 euros per month. Now place ownership in front of him. The same modest apartment in Lisbon costs roughly 350,000 euros. At a mortgage rate of about 3.5%, that becomes roughly 1,550 euros per month for 30 years. Heavy, expensive, sometimes barely reachable, but still within a different range. And that is the difference. Not comfort, conversion. The system Mikhail lives in stretches his hour. The system Tamara lives in compresses it. Same effort, different system, different life. Now zoom out again, because this story is not only about survival. There is another pull inside the system. A thin layer, a luxury layer. And this layer is small. Very small. About 2% of the world's population. Sitting in, moving through, or fighting to remain near the topmost edge of the system. And that is exactly why the carrot matters. Because almost everyone is running upward, but by definition almost everyone cannot live there. That upper layer does not only concentrate wealth, it concentrates prestige, status, prime real estate, elite education, private health access, high-end consumption, asset protection, staffing, maintenance, legal defense, security, design, construction, hospitality, mobility, finance, and image. It pulls not only money, it pulls human effort. It pulls human hours. So when we talk about the luxury layer, we are not talking only about people enjoying it. We are talking about enormous quantities of human life used to build it, service it, protect it, maintain it, staff it, clean it, transport it, finance it, repair it, market it, insure it, and keep it desirable. In this framework, about 1.35 trillion hours out of 6.6 trillion flow upward toward the highest value layers of the system. Roughly 20% of all human work hours serving just 2% of the population. This is not a detail. This is civilizational scale. And even conservatively, it reveals the direction of the machine. The point is not that rich people are evil. That is too simple, too childish, too easy. The point is that the catalyzer of the system is brutal. The system rewards upward concentration, so everyone runs. The poor run to survive, the middle run to secure, the upper middle run to climb, the wealthy run to preserve, and above them all the carrot keeps moving. Not because the system is cartoonishly evil, but because it rewards that direction. And generation after generation, the names at the top change. Some families rise, some families hold for 1 generation, 2, maybe 3, then some fall, others replace them. That is the game, that is the rule of the game, and that is why the carrot works. Because people are not only selling time for themselves, they are selling time for their children, for a room, for a diploma, for a postcode, for one more layer of safety. And in that sense, the carrot is not fake. It is powerful because it touches something real. Love, fear, responsibility, hope. That is why the system holds. Because it does not only organize production, it organizes longing. And once you see that, GDP stops looking like a neutral economic indicator. It starts looking like a ledger of human time, human pressure, human aspiration, human sacrifice. Now comes the colder revelation. Because up to this point, most people are still asking the wrong question. They ask, is the system fair? Is the system unfair? Is it moral, immoral, corrupt, rigged? But the deeper shock is this. While everyone is busy arguing over the system itself is beginning to disappear. Or more precisely, the system we knew, the one built on mass human labor as its central engine, is beginning to transform into something else. This is not theory, this is already happening. Factories already operate with fewer workers. Warehouses already sort, move, and track goods through automation. Cars, trucks, and logistics systems are increasingly guided by autonomous technologies. Aircraft have long operated with extensive automation for major portions of flight. Ports, distribution centers, and industrial processes already run with fewer human hands than before. This is not a question of if. It is already here, step by step, sector by sector, function by function. And now the real proto-question arrives. For generations, one of the few universal competitive advantages an ordinary human being had from birth was this. I can exchange my time for labor. That was the deal. That was the entry ticket. That was how the system used you and how you survived inside it. But what happens when that advantage disappears? What happens to low-income countries built around labor competitiveness when labor itself becomes less necessary? What happens to high-income countries when their own populations are no longer central to production either? What happens to the middle class when whole sectors begin to thin out, then vanish? What exactly are we building for our children if the ladder itself is being automated away? Will there be universal basic income? If so, who funds it? Who controls it? Under what terms? And more importantly, what is the role of the human being inside a system that no longer depends on human beings in the way it once did? That is the real cold shower. Not only that the system was unequal, not only that the ledger was brutal, but that we may be entering a moment where even exploitation itself changes form, where the question is no longer only, why is the machine unfair? But, what happens when the machine no longer needs this many people near it at all? That is the bigger force. That is the deeper story. And that is why this episode matters. Because GDP alone is not enough. GDP measures output. GDP measures human time spent underneath that output. One measures what the world makes, the other measures what human beings paid for it. And once you place those two ledgers together, the world stops looking merely unequal. It starts looking directional, structured, engineered. And once you see that structure, the next question becomes unavoidable. Not only what is the system, but what comes after it. This is Game of Powers by Igor Bronist.